Welcome to our explainer. Closing down a business isn't as simple as just locking the door and walking away. It's actually a really detailed process. Today, we're going to dive deep and focus on the one person at the center of it all, the LLP liquidator.
I want you to think about it like this. An LLP that's closing is kind of like a big building that's about to be demolished. You can't just take a wrecking ball to it, right? It has to be taken down carefully, piece by piece. Well, the LLP liquidator is that demolition expert. They're the one making sure every single asset is accounted for, every debt is paid, and the whole thing is dismantled safely, so nobody gets hurt financially.
So, here's what we're going to cover. We'll start with who a liquidator actually is. Then we'll walk through how they get appointed, what their main jobs are, how they're held accountable, and finally, how the whole winding up process is supervised. Let's get into it. All right, first things first. Who exactly is this key player? Let's break down what an LLP liquidator is, officially speaking. Now, this isn't a job you can just apply for. The law is super specific here. An LLP liquidator has to be picked from a special panel that's maintained by the central government. And there's a really good reason for this. It's all about making sure that from day one, the person in charge has a high level of expertise and integrity. And when you look at who's actually on this panel, it makes perfect sense. We're talking about really experienced professionals, chartered accountants, lawyers, company secretaries. These are the folks who deal with finance and corporate law all day, every day. It's not just about having a fancy title. It's about making sure the person in charge has the exact skills needed to untangle what can be a very complex business. Okay, so we know who can be a liquidator, but how do they actually land the job? The way they're appointed is a really, really important part of this whole story. This is where the whole system of checks and balances really comes into play. See, the partners can kick off the process, but they absolutely do not get the final say. Look at that third step. It needs approval from 2/3 of the creditors. That's a huge deal. It gives the people who are owed money a powerful voice to make sure the person managing the shutdown is someone they trust. And if they don't like the choice, they get to pick their own. It's a fantastic safeguard. And wait, before they can even think about starting, there's one more absolutely critical step. They have to declare their independence. They have to file a form and formally state that they have no conflicts of interest. Why is this so important? Well, because you need someone who is completely impartial, someone who won't play favorites with one creditor or partner over another. This isn't just a box-ticking exercise. It's the very foundation of trust in this process. All right, so they're in. They've been appointed, and they've declared they're completely independent. So what's next? What exactly is their job now? Let's get into their core responsibilities. Now, this is a massive moment. This second that liquidator is appointed, the partners are basically out of the picture. All their power to run the LLP, it's gone. Their one and only job left is to file the paperwork that tells the registrar who's in charge now. From this point on, the liquidator is running the show. So, what's in their official playbook? Well, it's a mix of being a detective and a super organized administrator. They have to figure out who all the creditors are, settle all the LLP's debts, and keep perfect, detailed records of absolutely everything. But it's not just about outsiders. They also have to sort out the financial rights between the partners themselves. It's a complete top-to-bottom financial cleanup. But beyond all those specific tasks on the to-do list, the law throws in this one crucial overarching rule. They must act with due care and diligence. Now, that might sound like legal jargon, but it's not. It's a professional standard. It's the law saying you can't just phone this in. It holds them to a much higher standard of responsibility for every single decision they make. So, with all that power and all that responsibility, there has to be a system to keep things in check, right? So, how is a liquidator held accountable? And what happens if they just aren't doing their job correctly? Well, this system has a couple of built-in eject buttons. There are two main ways to get rid of a liquidator who isn't performing. The tribunal can step in if there's a valid reason, but just as important, the very same people who appointed them, the partners or the creditors, can also remove them. And it's a fair process. In either situation, the liquidator has to be given a chance to be heard and make their case. And this might just be the most important rule for accountability of them all. The liquidator's accounts have to be audited. It's completely non-negotiable. This means an independent third party has to come in and check every single financial move the liquidator made. It is the ultimate guarantee that everything is being done by the book.
Okay, for our final chapter, let's zoom out and look at the big picture. How is this entire winding up process supervised to make sure it actually finishes properly?
You see, this whole thing isn't a one-person show. The partners and creditors can actually form their own committees to keep an eye on the liquidator. You can think of them as like a board of directors for the dissolution. They work with the liquidator to make sure every decision is in the best interest of everyone involved.
And to keep everybody in the loop, the liquidator has a reporting requirement. They have to report on the progress of the winding up every single quarter. This is done on a specific form, and it goes to the partners or creditors, giving them regular updates so there are absolutely no surprises along the way.
And here it is, maybe the most powerful safety net in the whole system. Even though this whole thing started as a voluntary process, the tribunal, that's the specialized court that handles these cases, always has the final word. If things start to go sideways, they can step in, stop everything, and take direct control by changing it to a compulsory winding up. It's the ultimate backstop.
Every business has a beginning, right? But what about the end? Well, for a limited liability partnership, or an LLP, closing down isn't as simple as just locking the doors and walking away. Oh no, it's a formal, legal process with some very specific rules, and they're all designed to protect everyone involved. So let's break down exactly how it works.
So really, what does happen when an LLP officially calls it a day? You know, it's so much more than a handshake and a goodbye. There's a formal legal path you have to follow, and it's there for a good reason, to make sure all the debts are paid off and any remaining assets are split up fairly. It's all about protecting everyone, from the partners themselves to the people they owe money to.
And the official term for this whole process is winding up. And honestly, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's the entire procedure of settling the books, selling off assets, paying all the bills, and then distributing whatever is left. This is the official road that leads to the final legal end of the LLP.
Now, when it comes to winding up an LLP, you've got two main ways this can go down. The first path is voluntary. That's where the partners themselves decide it's time to close up shop. But the second one is forced, where an external legal body, a special court called a tribunal, actually orders the closure. Let's dig into both of these.
Okay, here's our game plan. We're going to start with that voluntary route, the planned exit. Then we'll get into these super important rules for handling the money, which apply no matter how it's dissolved. After that, we'll look at what happens when a tribunal has to step in. And to wrap it all up, we'll do a quick summary of the key differences to make sure everything is crystal clear.
All right, let's kick things off with that first path, the voluntary winding up. This is what happens when the partners themselves make a collective decision to dissolve the LLP. Think of it as the planned, internally driven exit strategy.
As you can see, this voluntary process is really structured. It all starts with a professional called a liquidator, and their whole job is to get the finances in order and create a final report. But this isn't just one person's call. The partners or the creditors have to vote to approve that report. Once they do, things get official. The paperwork moves from the partners to the registrar and the tribunal for a final legal check. If it all lines up, the tribunal gives the final dissolution order. That's the legal stamp of approval that officially, finally, ends the LLP's existence.
And getting that approval, that's a pretty high bar to clear. It actually requires a 2/3 majority of all the partners to agree. So this isn't some simple 51% vote. The law sets this threshold high to make sure that a small group of partners can't just force a dissolution against the wishes of a big chunk of the group. And this whole process runs on a really tight schedule. The partners have just 30 days to approve the report. Then, the liquidator only has 15 days after that to get all the paperwork filed. From there, the tribunal tries to issue its final order within 60 days. These deadlines are serious, and they're there to keep the process moving forward efficiently.
Okay, let's talk about the money. Because whether the winding up is voluntary or forced by a tribunal, there are some very strict, non-negotiable rules for how the finances are handled.
Right, so the first and most important principle is the order of payment. Before any partner sees a single penny, all the LLP's assets have to be used to pay off its liabilities, all of its debts. This is done on what's called a pari passu basis. It's a Latin term that means on equal footing, and it just ensures all general creditors get treated equally. Only after every single debt is paid off can any leftover surplus be given back to the partners, based on what their original agreement says.
But wait, here's a really crucial point of priority. Before anyone, and I mean even the creditors, gets paid, the costs of the winding up process itself have to be covered first. The liquidator's fee, all the administrative expenses, they get paid right off the top. So why is that? Well, it's to make sure the whole process is managed professionally and correctly from start to finish.
Okay, so now let's switch gears and explore that second path, winding up by the tribunal. This is what we're calling the forced exit. This is when the decision to dissolve the LLP doesn't come from the partners, but from an external legal authority that compels the closure.
So who has the power to kick this whole process off? Well, it's actually a surprisingly broad group of people. Of course, the LLP itself or its partners can file a petition. So can any secured creditors who are owed money. But here's the interesting part. Government bodies can also step in. The registrar, who keeps an eye on all the LLPs, or even the central government itself, can file a petition to have an LLP wound up.
Now, what's really fascinating is that the requirements to petition the tribunal change depending on who's doing the asking. If the partners themselves want to go this route, they need a massive consensus. We're talking a 3/4 majority. But if it's the government's registrar filing the petition, they don't need a partner vote. Instead, they need approval from the central government and cold, hard evidence that the LLP simply can't pay its debts.
So we've walked through the two main roads to dissolution. One that's driven by the partners and one that's forced by the courts. Let's just take a second to quickly summarize the key differences. So here's the breakdown in a nutshell. A voluntary winding up is an internal, planned decision made by the partners. Winding up by a tribunal, on the other hand, is usually a reaction to a big problem, like not being able to pay debts, and it's driven by outsiders. You could almost boil it down to choice versus consequence. But in the end, both paths lead to the exact same destination, the end of the LLP.